In a world filled with screens and distractions, we invite you to reconnect with the natural world around you. Welcome to Nature Bound, a podcast dedicated to unpacking the intrinsic bond between humans and nature. We'll uncover the benefits of spending time outdoors, including how a nature-centric lifestyle can improve your mental health, elevate your leadership skills, and unleash your creativity. And now here's your host, outdoor enthusiast, and renowned author of The 7 Principles of the Magic Rock, Emanuel Rose.
Welcome to Nature Bound, and today we're going to have a great conversation about how to get a plan and some activities for generating happiness in your life. And I think if you're like me, I've had periods where challenges of life brought me down to a spot where I wasn't sure what was next, what I needed to do, how I was going to do it, and whether it was even worth doing. Things like getting divorced, having family members pass away, getting fired from a job, and those challenges that drive a person back into very deep values clarification, and then getting a process, a daily process to get focused and get in action around being happy again. And today we have a guest named Trevor Peterson, who is a psychologist and professor out of one of the most beautiful places on the West Coast, Klamath Falls. Welcome to the show, Trevor.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, so happy to have this conversation and the way it relates to the focus that I have, which is the values clarification and digging into what it is that makes me happy, that makes a person happy for their life. What is this creative spark, and how are they going to produce that, and how do they find that happiness? So that was the motivation for wanting to have you on the show today.
Thank you.
And what was it that triggered you to want to write about happiness?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I was a, typical kid, but very introverted and shy. And so growing up, I struggled to connect, and I was very inhibited. And I realized right away that it wasn't as easy for me, to build relationships and kind of find the joy in those. And so I think at a young age, I started this informal quest to figure this out, and tried lots of things that didn't work, and I always felt a little bit different, kind of like an outsider. And so as I matured, I started formally studying this. I pursued psychology, and then clinical psych, and then positive psych, the science of thriving and well-being. And at some point, I realized there's a lot of theories and a lot of positive psychology or happiness exercises out there, but I didn't really find this common denominator, this kind of underlying mechanism by which we can actually create happiness on a regular basis. So that became my pursuit over a decade, was if I could figure that out, then it would make it more accessible to all people to know the basics of how to generate this on a regular basis. So that was kind of how it all started, and led to a book called, Overlap: The Heart of Happiness. So.
Yeah, and so what's the overlap concept? Because that's not a standard psychology term, as I understand it.
Yeah, I kind of adopted it for my own purposes, but
Nice.
Let me, if it's okay, I'll just quickly explain it with the analogy. So
Yeah.
when I was a kid, I went to visit my uncle in Florida, and we went to this beach in the Florida Keys. And at the time, I didn't necessarily have all these insights, but on reflection, I've had them, and I realized at this beach, there's kind of 4 different groups of people. So the first group were the ones that were just flying by on the highway, and they were just passing by the beach. They maybe didn't even realize there was a beach there.
Mhm.
And they were missing it, right? So that was kind of level 1, was people who were just passing by living things. So the second group, they parked, they got out, they put down their chair, their umbrella, and they sat and they watched what was going on. And I call that level 2, spectating. You're observing nature or others from a distance. You're kind of in the stands, but not on the court of life yet. And so that does create a little more maybe joy or meaning or life satisfaction, but it's still at a very low level. So the third group of people were the ones that got off the chair, were like walking along the shallows and getting their feet wet, right? And I call that wading, level 3, where you're starting to connect a little bit with living things, but it's still pretty superficial, and it's there's limits on the joy you can get from that experience. And then the fourth level, which is fortunately what I was able to do with my family, were those who put some gear on, scuba diving or snorkeling gear. They committed, they swam out, and they dove down, and they experienced this whole new world, these reefs, just teeming with plant and animal life. They connected with it, they learned about it, they formed relationships with it, they were inspired, there was synergy, there was energy. They came back renewed, refreshed, energized, excited, changed, and I call that overlap, and that this highest level of engagement with living things that requires effort, that requires stepping outside our comfort zone, it requires diving underneath and connecting and forming relationships with things that normally we don't, that is transformative.
Well, I love that. Yeah, I love that idea that the juice or the joy comes from fully participating versus, like you're talking about, just either flying by or sitting around on the sidelines. We used to talk about that a lot. I did a lot of backpacking in Yosemite, and that it's like 85% of people who go to Yosemite never get out of their car.
Yeah.
And then we were doing 10 to 14-day backpacking trips in the backcountry, and you just think, wow, these people, yeah, they went to Yosemite, but what did they really get out of it, right? What did they experience? So I'm right there with you. I mean, a big part of what I believe is that our kind of our minute by minute, hour by hour daily practices really contribute to long-term sustainability of things that are important to us. And can you talk about how what you're recommending or what you've seen through research or what you do in your kind of daily practices to create this space for happiness and participating in life fully?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think that's often, in this book, I definitely acknowledge all these. I call them overlap dragons. It's kind of the barriers to connecting more deeply with the living things around us, and there are a ton. I mean, it's plentiful obstacles like distraction, being too busy, and fear, and depression, depletion. All these things can get in the way, and so there's just the practical demands of life. Usually we have to work to make some money and take care of things. And so I don't know if we have to have a massive change in our lifestyle, but I think we can try to just kind of sprinkle it on wherever possible, that there's these moments throughout each day where we could overlap with living things, being, other people, but also nature. So on your lunch break, you could quickly eat lunch, go outside and go on a walk, maybe with someone else, and enjoy the sounds of the birds, and find a trail near you to walk through a park and enjoy the trees and the plants. So that's it's a simple way. Waking up just a little bit earlier in the morning and going for a jog, driving home a different way each day for some novelty. Drive through a more natural area, get out for a minute. Sit next to the lake and just soak in the beauty that's there. And a lot of it's just being mindful, right? Being present and allowing all 5 senses to engage with what's going on around you. Really notice all the shapes and colors and textures and movements, and hear all the different sounds. Slow down enough to hear the unique sounds that normally you'd miss. Smell, these unique smells that come in from the trees or the dirt or what's around you, and just absorb it. In Japan, they talk about like forest bathing, where you just try to slow down to really absorb all the stimulation, all the gifts kind of being offered to you in that moment by whatever nature scene you're in. So yeah, I think it's just slowing down a little bit, but taking breaks in nature where possible. And the other thing is, so in this book I talk about these 4 laws of overlap, and one of them is that the more we value living things, the more life they take on, the more vitality, the more gifts they have to offer us. So I have this example of, I didn't think anything of birds early in my life. It was just a shadow in a tree. I could care less. And then I had a friend who introduced me to birding, which is, bird watching and listening for birds. And he's like, okay, like you got to actually give these birds a chance because they're really cool. So he gave me some binoculars so I could actually see them and see what was up in that tree. And it was spectacular, right? I mean, just the beautiful colors and the textures and the amazing behaviors and the powers these birds have to fly across entire oceans without stopping, and just phenomenal memories in some cases. And so as I researched and learned about birds, I started to really value them. They took on a lot of life, and they were really fun to overlap with and learn and see. And now every time I go on a walk, I'm watching for, okay, what's migrating through here, and let me see if I can get a good picture of it so I can identify it and add it to my life list and learn more about it. And so, yeah, if we start learning about nature and the wonders of it, whether it's like rocks, learning about geology, like where did this rock come from? How many years did it take to create? What volcano did it fly out of? Then you appreciate it, right? You appreciate the bird, you appreciate the rock, you appreciate the tree and its uniqueness and its capacities. And then we're just surrounded by wonder, right? Instead of feeling like we're in this lifeless environment, we're surrounded by incredible vitality, and that's fun to be a part of, which you can only get, I think, if you know enough about the things around you to appreciate what's really there, the complexity and the detail. So.
And then how do you recommend, or how do you help parents implement this kind of activity for their kids? I mean, how do we build this into the daily activities for your children or your grandchildren?
Yeah, I think, when you think about, I like to think of it just kind of like a recipe. And yeah, your recipe needs to include school and some study time and maybe some screen time. But if this is a important nutrient that our kids need, then we'd want to factor this in too. And so I think screen time is becoming more and more common, just a lot of time playing video games or watching shows or YouTube. And it's not that that's evil or wrong, but it can start to eclipse other activities that meet important physical and social and psychological needs. So that's the kind of the practical way I like to think about it, is if you look at a kid, like what are their physical, social, and psychological needs that need to be met for them to be balanced and fulfilled and happy and content. And if any one behavior is starting to eclipse the others, that becomes concerning, because it's taking the time that they could have had outside exercising and playing with friends and enjoying nature and the beauty and aesthetics of that. And so it's just kind of helping a parent figure out, okay, can we maybe reduce a little bit of the screen time and replace it with a little more outdoor time, so those other psychological needs for learning and growth and connection can be met that maybe wouldn't be if they did just too much of one thing. So.
And what about what do you do when you notice that you're not happy, you're not following your happiness protocol? Like, how do you turn your ship, Trevor Peterson's ship, around
Yeah.
from those doldrums, right?
Yeah, and it's so easy, right, to fall into them, where you just get busy and you do a lot of one thing, and you feel the deficit, you feel malnourished, right, psychologically or spiritually or socially. And so I think it's just taking a if you can, a daily accounting, maybe pull out a journal in the evening and say, okay, where am I at? Let me look at my needs for connection, for contribution, for growth, for variety, for beauty, and where am I lacking, and what can I do tomorrow to do this better? Am I going to actually take a lunch break and go on a walk up in the hills behind my work, which fortunately I can do here? Or am I going to take my kids birding, or am I going to go to the lake on the weekend because I haven't had that green time? And so I think it's just being mindful that it's really easy to slip out of a routine where we include these types of things in our life. But if we plan it and we're accountable each evening, then we can create a better recipe the next day that has all of the nutrients met, that isn't too much of anything. So, and sometimes, it's like, well, I don't have the time or the money, but this can be done in simple ways. I was learning a lot about insects at one point, and I wanted to introduce this to my kids. And so I said, okay, let's just do this little challenge, because my kids are very competitive. We're going to divide up. Half of you are going to take a magnifying glass and a phone, with a camera, and you're going to go out there and we're going to see in 45 minutes who can identify the most insects, right? Different insects. You actually got to take a picture so that we can compare. And we found around 50 different insects in a matter of 40 so minutes in our own backyard, right?
Amazing.
Turning over rocks and looking in the flowers and in the trees and in the weeds and by this little stream, and just plentiful life all around us that we normally miss. And, when you get down there and look, I mean, we found this insect, it's called a snake fly, and it looks like a dragon. Our kids are like, my goodness, we found like a miniature dragon. It's this long neck and long tail and these huge wings, and it totally reminded us of a dragon, and I didn't even know that existed in Oregon. But and so, yeah, there's just this excitement and energy that we live in this place just thriving with life. And it didn't take more than, I mean, we could have done 20 minutes worth and it probably had the same impact in our own backyard. We didn't even have to go to a park, just getting down, looking more closely. Ralph Waldo Emerson has this quote that many eyes go through the meadow, but few see the flowers. We're kind of going through life, but are we seeing the complexity and the beauty of nature around us? And it's almost anywhere you look if you turn over the rock and look more closely.
That's cool. Yeah, the transcendentalists, they all really saw that form of presencing in nature that was kind of, I think, before their time in some respects. Thoreau has such a similar quote about some men fish their entire lives without knowing it's not fish that they're after. So it's the same quote essentially, right? Yeah, pretty magical. What other sort of activities do you like to do when you're taking these happiness breaks or happiness focused activities, I guess?
Yeah. Oh, and if you don't mind, I'll go back real quick because I was also thinking about the first question about parents. How do we help them support their kids in this when maybe kids naturally gravitate towards, let's say, video games because they're just so stimulating. And I think another thing is just if they're aware of all the benefits of nature. And it sounds like in your show you've been talking about these a lot, but there are so many. I mean, did some research on this, and it reduces stress, it broadens perspective, it improves attention ability. So if they need to go back and do some homework, actually time in nature is kind of a brain break where they're not, this directed focus is relaxed because they can enjoy kind of the soft fascinations of nature. So when they go back to having to study math, they have that directed focus replenished. So there's that. Just inspiration can enhance actually social cohesion, reduce aggression, improve respiration, increase gratitude, better physical health. They're often more active, reduce mortality rates from cardiovascular disease, improve mood, enhance, quality of life, life satisfaction. I mean, you just go on and on. So if parents really are aware of that, they may be like, oh man, this is worth even a little bit of a battle with my kid to get him outside, because in the end, it's going to be so good for him. But on that note, going back to the most recent question, I think it's just trying when I am in nature, so I do more fully appreciate it, trying to go from, spectating to waiting all the way to overlap. So if I'm outside, maybe I do climb that tree, so I can see what it's like to see my neighborhood from a different perspective. If I'm healthy enough and it's safe enough to do that. If I go to Crater Lake, kind of like you were saying with Yosemite, I don't just park at the rim and look. I drive around the rim. We climb to the top of Watchman Towers to see it from the bird's eye view. We climb all the way down and we go rock jumping into the water. So we're actually in the lake and experiencing what it's like to be in a lake that's that deep with 100 feet of clarity. We do the activities. We, like you said, I increase my proximity and I participate more in nature. And then I start to glean all the gifts it has to offer, which you can't get if you're just spectating. So, and when we do that, it's just so motivating that we want it more. Like we're like, I got to get back there soon because that was amazing. That was so refreshing. That was so invigorating. That was so energizing. I think if we're just spectating, we could watch a nature show and get a similar impact. And there's benefit of that too, actually. But really connecting, really touching nature, that's, I think, where we get more change and more energy and more motivation to keep doing it.
Yeah, I agree, and I think I agree also that it's important for parents to figure out how to trigger their kids to want to go and do it and spend time outside. And it's really not that hard once you kind of get through you break through the original lack of desire, right? You can say, hey, we'll go and eat outside, or we'll go fishing, or we'll learn how to skip rocks, or something that triggers them and that's interesting. Doing something, right?
Yeah. If there's at least part of that activity that they enjoy, then that will kind of get them along for the rest of the journey. And I, just like you're saying, with my kids, I've got a few kids, and almost always when we're like, let's go on a hike, there's just, for whatever reason, there's some resistance. I'm kind of tired, or there's just some, it's just because it does take effort, right? And after a long week, especially on the weekend, it's just like, I just want to take a nap or relax. But inevitably, when we go out there and we go on the hike, they enjoy it, right? They're always after, they're like, oh man, that was so cool to see that bullfrog or to see that muskrat or or we do skip rocks. And like, man, I can't believe I skipped rocks. There's always things they glean that they're grateful and they enjoyed it. And so I think as a parent, I always have to keep that in mind too, of like, okay, it's a little bit of a battle. Anything that requires effort is a little bit of a battle, right. But in the end, I know they're going to enjoy it. And they even admit it at the end. Like, that was actually kind of fun. That was better than just, staying home and playing one more video game.
Yeah, for sure. And it provides some depth in the fabric of the family too, right? You've got these shared experiences that you can call back on when you need to. Yeah. Well, how do people get a hold of you, get in touch with the book, engage with your content, Trevor?
Yeah, so I've got websites, Dr. Trevor Peterson, sen.com, and some information there. The book is on Amazon. Again, it's just Overlap, The Heart of Happiness, an evidence-based recipe for joy, meaning, and life satisfaction. It can be found there. I'm happy. I guess my website has my contact information, so feel free to reach out with questions. I'm happy to chat with anyone about this topic. I'm really passionate about it and think it's so good and healthy for us, and it just enriches our life. Like you said, it creates memories. It's just something that is so life enhancing, that is so easy to miss now. I mean, there's so many conveniences that pull us away from nature, and not just nature, but connection with any living thing, humans as well. Gardening, that we just don't have to do these things anymore. The things that we evolved to love, and that are, that biophilia hypothesis that, if we evolved with nature, like nature is just ingrained within us, and without it, we feel deprived. And so I think it's really critical that we, like you're promoting, find ways to stay in touch with what brings us so much life.
Yeah, I agree. It's in modern time, it seems like it's optional, but by having time in nature be optional, we have created a lot of dis-ease and psychosis, and so I really appreciate the effort that you're making, and the book that you wrote, and the work that you're doing. And I hope we can catch up and go for a hike sometime in K Falls, because it's one of my favorite spots.
A lot of great spots. Yeah, I'd love to take it to a few places. So and with your final comments, it's true. I mean, the rates of depression, anxiety, and suicidality in kids are just on the rise, and it's not because we're in some deprived country with lack of resources. It's because we're disconnected from what brings life, from people, from nature, from the things that really bring vitality. And so it is kind of it's a critical thing for our mental health, that we're more serious about connecting with these things. And even just not just stress, but just the perspective it brings back to life. Sometimes the problems we have once you're out in nature, they go back to their proportion, and then they're real, and we shouldn't deny them, but we can see them in proportion, that, okay, we do have this 20% of our life that's difficult and hard, but then there's this other 80% that's beautiful and wonderful. And when we're connected with that, it's easier to manage that 20%.
It's beautiful. All right, Trevor, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Emanuel.
Look forward to talking to you again soon.
Sounds good. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Nature Bound. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss a future episode. If you found value in today's episode, please share with someone who needs to hear it. Be sure to purchase your copy of The 7 Principles of the Magic Rock at emanuelrose.com or on Amazon. We thank you again for joining us today, and remember to get nature bound.